Welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today was part 2 of our series where we talk about what is next for the first round losers of the NBA playoffs. So if you didn't see part 1, that was about all the Western Conference first round losers. So there's going to be a link in the description if you want to check that video out. But today's part 2, we're talking about the Eastern Conference first round losers. And definitely let me know down in the comments if you want to see me do a video about the second round losers. I'd be more than willing to do that, but let's get into the Eastern Conference first-round losers. Starting off with the Miami Heat, the 8th seed. I don't think really anyone was shocked by the fact that they lost this series, and even if Jimmy Butler would have played, I still think the Celtics just had such an astronomical high-end talent advantage over this Miami Heat team. I know that the Heat have had like the psychological edge on the Celtics, and on top of that, I feel like Eric Spoelstra has time in and time out flexed the fact that he is the best coach in the NBA, completely exposing the Celtics in prior series. But all that being said, this is a different Celtics team, especially back in the first round before Porzingis was injured. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. I think this current Boston Celtics starting five, when fully healthy, is the best starting five since the Kevin Durant Warriors. That's how highly I think of this starting five. So even though the Heat have beaten up on the Celtics in years prior, this is just a different team. When you add in the fact of Drew Holiday and you add in Kristaps Porzingis, you can argue Porzingis was probably having like the best year of his career, and Drew Holiday just again made another all-defensive team. So this is just a different Celtics team. Not really a shock. I don't think Jimmy would have really changed the outcome much, but let's talk about for the Heat, what's next for them going forward. And I don't really think there's really any other option than them just doubling down on their current their current core of players. Now, you can definitely make some marginal changes on the edges of this roster in terms of the role player, but I think that they're really committed to their core group of guys, which at this point, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo. I think now that Terry Rozier would probably be a part of that, Tyler Herro, and I think Jaime Jaquez has now kind of entered that group. So those those five guys there, I think is really the core of the Miami Heat. I'd be shocked if they move off those guys in the next couple of years. I really feel like that is the guys that they are building around down there. And I know that there's been some rumblings in terms of maybe Jimmy Butler leaving the Heat. I would bet basically everything I own that Jimmy Butler is going to be with the Miami Heat for at least next season. You know, I just can't see a world with that happening. I think that the culture-wise, they just fit each other perfectly. The Miami Heat culture and Jimmy Butler, I would be shocked if he was gone. To me, that feels like kind of the media playing up a little story and kind of trying to make that blow up. So for me, I don't see them really, even though realistically this team at full health, could this team, Miami Heat team, win a finals? I don't think it's possible. I just don't think they have enough high-end talent. They do have the best coach in the NBA. They have Jimmy Butler, who's a certified playoff stud, but when they match up with some of these other elite teams in the NBA, like the current rendition of the Celtics, like the Nuggets last year, and even if you look at some of the new young teams on the rise, like at OKC or Minnesota, I just don't think that they, from a talent perspective, can stay in those games. And Jimmy Butler's not getting younger, but for me, the Heat, they're never going to take a step back. They're never going to, quote-unquote tank or rebuild, anything like that as long as Pat Riley's there. So I think that they're just going to, really stick to their core group of guys. They're still going to be a good team. They still, I think, have, depending on how the seeding plays out in the East, they could still make a deeper run. But in terms of them ever winning a finals in the Jimmy Butler era, I think it'd be kind of naive at this point to say that's going to ever happen. I think last year was probably their best opportunity because they actually took that Nuggets team to 6 games. And I think if it was ever going to happen, it would have been that year. I just don't see it with this Heat team. But one thing I would love to see them do going forward is actually give a fuck about the regular season, because they do this year in and year out. They're so nonchalant about the regular season, Jimmy in particular, and then it came back to bite them in the ass now, because maybe if they would have matched up with a different team in the first round, they could have they could have won their first round matchup, maybe even without Jimmy, and then he comes back for the second round. But they wanted to dick around in the regular season. They end up in the play-in, and they have to play the almighty Boston Celtics, and they got punched in the face. So that's just one little critique I'd have for the Heat team, is maybe actually try in the regular season. That way you don't make it so goddamn difficult on yourself come postseason. Next up is the 5-seeded Orlando Magic. They lost to the Cavs in 7, and they got really nothing to feel bad about. I mean, they were massively ahead of schedule. They were the second youngest team in the NBA playoffs, only behind the Oklahoma City Thunder. So being that far ahead of schedule, there really isn't much to talk about with this Magic team. It's really just they have to keep their core group of guys together and just keep building this team up. And I think in a couple years, this team could be threatening for a title because they're already so good. And you look at their lead guy, Paolo, I believe he's only 22. I could be getting that wrong. Let me know if I'm wrong on that in the comments, but I'm pretty sure Paolo's like 22 years old and already has the poise of like a 10-year NBA veteran. So it's like this Magic team, I think going forward, they have one of the brightest futures in the NBA. And they also got a collection of really nice talent around Paolo as well. Obviously, Franz Wagner, who didn't play great in the playoff series against Cleveland. Jalen Suggs has really carved himself out a really nice role in the NBA. Kind of looked like a bust early on, but that's why I hate when people throw around the bust word so quickly, because he just needed time to find his role, and he's found a great role as the lead perimeter guard, one of really the more elite defensive guys at his position in the league. And I could be wrong about this, but did he make All-NBA second team? Let me know again in the comments if I'm getting that wrong or not. But then I just really like this collection of talent. Like I said, they were massively ahead of schedule. One thing I do think they need to address, though, my number one thing would be to go after like a legit scorer to kind of try to take some of that pressure off of Paolo, because really in that Cavs series, no one else offensively stepped up. Like I said, Franz really struggled, and the big thing that stuck out for me was their lack of three-point production was really bad, especially if you just go look at game one. I don't remember the exact stat, but there was a stretch where they went like 3 of 28, it felt like, from 3. Like, that's how bad they were shooting in game one, and they just couldn't keep up with the Cavs. So I think if they went out there, not exactly this player, but a player in this mold, a guy like Zach LaVine with this Orlando Magic team that already has a really good defensive infrastructure built up, and you go out there who just get a guy who has his eye on scoring the ball, that would really, I think, elevate this Magic team where they could be threatening to make like a conference final run, because they already have such a good blueprint in place. So that's really my thing, is just target a certified bucket getter. And I think there's going to be a lot of guys like that in the offseason on the market. So the Magic, they don't really need to make any drastic thing happen. I just think really target a scorer, and they have one of the brightest futures in the league going forward. Next up, we have the 3-seeded Milwaukee Bucks, which lost to the Indiana Pacers, and I think that this might be the biggest disappointment of the entire NBA season, because when Damian Lillard was traded there, I'm pretty sure they were the favorite to win the NBA title. To have that high of expectations and lose in the first round, and I get it. I know they dealt with injuries. Giannis didn't play at all in the playoffs. Damian Lillard got banged up towards the end of this series. But they did themselves zero favors with how they ran this team during the regular season, starting off 30-13. Yeah, they had some issues in terms of ingraining Dame. It didn't look pretty. But 30-13 is 30-13. And I still have not been given a concrete reason, like a real strong number one reason why Adrian Griffin was fired. That firing made zero fucking sense to begin with. And especially like what you did to this guy, because when you hired him for this job, the team was a completely different team. This is back before Dame was even there. And on top of that, even if they wouldn't have made the Damian Lillard trade, this team would have still had championship aspirations because Giannis. So you're giving a first-time head coach a team with extremely high aspirations. He starts to get his game plan together, and then you just completely uproot the fundamental foundation of this team, which was built on defense. You got rid of the heart and soul of that with Jrue Holiday, threw in Dame, and on the fly, he's still able to keep them as a great team in the regular season at 30-13. You canned his ass and bring in Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers was a fledgling disaster as the Milwaukee Bucks head coach. And I didn't check, but I'm pretty sure he went 500 this year with that Bucks team. Is just an unmitigated disaster. I don't know what the solution for this Bucks team is. I think really they have one realistic solution. That's just to run it back next year and kind of hope that the woes that plagued them the shit that plagued them this past year in terms of like the locker room shit, the chemistry stuff, the coaching problems, they kind of just have to hope that goes away and they're just going to figure it out. Now, the likelihood of that happening, it really worries me, because I don't even know if Damian Lillard wants to be there anymore. Between his body language, between his fit, his chemistry on the floor with Giannis, it just looked off, in my opinion. And if you're like, Doc Rivers definitely has his strong suits, but if your number one ambition is to win the title, I don't think Doc Rivers is the right guy for that in 2024. I just don't. So the Bucks, if there are Bucks fans listening to this, I would really want you to comment down below and tell me exactly what the fuck happened to this Bucks team throughout the regular season, because it's literally one of the most bizarre situations I've ever seen. Because on paper, this should be like a top 3 team in the NBA. And on top of that, I'd also like you to tell me what the hell happened with Adrian Griffin. Why exactly was he fired? Because we were still never really given a concrete reason as to why that happened. And they were significantly worse in terms of their record after he was gone. And last but not least, we have the 7-seeded Philadelphia 76ers, and it's just frustrating at this point. Like, the Sixers, I try not to do, like, second teams. I think that's kind of lame, but if I had a second team in the NBA, I guess it would be the Sixers, because I'm such a massive Embiid fan, and it's just so frustrating. It's just one of those teams where, at full health could be really good, and it feels like they're just going to go down. Like, when we look back on the Joel Embiid era in Philly, I feel like we're always going to like put a what if next to it. It's like, what if Joel could have stayed healthy? Or what if the Ben Simmons shit didn't blow up? Or what if James Harden would have just stayed there? What if Jimmy would have just stayed there? Like, because if you put James Harden from last year, just keep that team together, I think that they would have gotten past the Knicks, because look at how good James Harden was in the playoffs this year as the Clippers. Was he perfect? No, but I think he had one of his better playoff performances of recent memory. He averaged like 26 on good efficiency. You put that James Harden on the Sixers team, I think they pretty easily get past the Knicks. And it's such a shame, because if Embiid doesn't basically have a perfect game and drop like 50, and on top of that, Maxey would have to have like a 30-point game. Like, if they don't combine for like 80 points, then I feel like this team just has a 0% chance to win a playoff series, because who else on the team would have stepped up? Tobias Harris, that's a joke. Kyle Lowry, Nick Batum had that sweet play-in game against, I think that was against Miami. But I just don't know. I feel like this team is desperately missing that third star. And they're a team to definitely watch for Paul George. I really hope that happens, as someone who kind of does root for the Sixers. I would like to see Paul George on this team. I think he would fix a lot of problems that the Sixers have. Their over-reliance on Joel and Maxey. But the likelihood for me still of Paul George leaving the Clippers is so minuscule. Like, I just don't see him leaving LA. There's like, unless you land Paul George, there's really no quick fix to the Sixers' issues. Like, yeah, they're going to have a lot of cap space, but it ultimately comes down to the way that this team is structured is ultimately flawed. It's all reliant on Joel Embiid to dominate. And if he even has he could still have a good game, but if he doesn't have a great game, they don't really stand a chance. They're lacking the high-end talent of some of the other teams out there. That's why the Knicks were able to pull them apart, is because the Knicks have arguably the deepest roster in the NBA right now. And they were just able to out-talent the 76ers. If Joel didn't go nuclear, the Sixers just really didn't have a chance. So going forward, obviously the dream scenario for Philly would be to land Paul George. I don't know how realistic that is. And I dread the next season, because I feel like the same fucking thing's going to happen again. Is Joel Embiid's going to look awesome to start off the year, then he's going to get injured, and then the same shit plays out. So I don't know with Philly. I'm at my wit's end rooting for this team, because it's so frustrating. It's one of the most chaotic teams to really be a fan of. But that's kind of my rant on all these first-round teams. Definitely let me know your thoughts about everything I said here in the comments. Definitely let me know if you want to see me do the second-round coverage. But I definitely will be getting a video out of my conference final breakdown. But thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe.